CAMPO meeting in order then, and can I get roll call, please? Thank you.
Chair Kimbrough,
Here.
Vice Chair Stidfield. Here. Member Bagwell. Here. Member Bonkowski. Here. Member Erb. I know you're here. Member Hastings. I know you're here. Member McQuarrie. I know you're here as well. Member Rosenberg. Ex officio Member Rosenberg. A quorum's present.
All right, thank you. Is there any changes in the agenda? Lucia, I have none.
No, Mr. Chair.
Any disclosures for the meeting? Look up at the screen and if somebody raise a hand or yell or. Seeing no disclosures then. Public comment, and this is a chance for the public to make comments. So how do we handle that with these meetings? This is my first.
Mr. Chair, there is no public comment at this time.
So he said no, right? Okay, thank you. So that's why you're all pointing to the dark room back there. I got it. All right, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is there's some minutes, so either any changes or approval, please.
I move to approve the minutes of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization for April 8th, 2020 as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anybody else? Nope. All right, good. Now we're into the public meeting for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a reallocation of surface transportation program block grant funds between the three member agencies of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. Lucia, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. As you are aware, in 2016, the CAMPO Board agreed to a proportional distribution method for the annual Surface Transportation Block Grant that funding that comes to CAMPO. And this proportional distribution was based on the urban area population at the time that agreement was set. Based on 2010 census. It's allocated for Carson City at 70.6, Douglas County at 13.5, and Lyon County 15.9%. In order to avoid really small funding allocations each year, a schedule was established to give larger portions at certain years to Douglas and Lyon counties. Douglas County was apportioned in 2019 and Lyon County was to be apportioned in 2020. Due to the stringent requirements that would be placed on Lyon County for the use of STBG funds, Lyon County is releasing its share of STBG funds to other CAMPO agencies. CAMPO staff first reached out to Douglas County to ascertain whether Douglas County could use those funds. Like Lyon County, Douglas County indicated that they would not be able to have the resources to add a project and use the STBG funds during this round. Subsequently, Carson City staff confirmed their ability to bring a project forward. CAMPO staff is recommending the allocation of Lyon County's federal fiscal year 2020 STBG funding apportionment, which is the amount of $617 to be allocated to Carson City. There is no fiscal impact associated with the requested action today. Member agencies are responsible for the 5% local match if or when funding is utilized. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Any questions, staff? Go ahead, Brett.
So since Lyon County is giving up their allocation now, would we look at giving them first crack at allocation for the next round of funding, which would be like 2022?
So this is the last fiscal year under this specific agreement. Staff internally have started discussions about whether the way we did it this past time is working. It's something that I would like the opportunity to talk further with Douglas and Lyon County staff. Other neighboring jurisdictions do like a call for projects each year where this much money is available and it goes out to the partners, and if they have a project, they come back. That's another way we could do it. This way seems to be working and it is fair. However, we've experienced a couple instances where the money kind of has to change around. So if you have any suggestions, I'd appreciate any comments to that effect because we'll be looking at that for next year.
Any other
This
questions?
is Bob, this is Bob Hastings. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Brad, I just want to say thank you for that. You beat me to it. I would like to make sure that we do involve county staff moving forward in the allocations in the future, because this is a fair amount of money to be giving up by the county. I understand why it's being done, but that's just my 2 cents. I want to make sure that we kind of get credit for this in the future. So that would be my only thing.
All right. Any other questions of staff?
This is Sandra. Just a comment on the funding that Alicia said. This is last year under the current agreement. This is a statewide fund source, and several years ago we agreed with CAMPO as the only MPO area that doesn't automatically get a sub-allocation to award a certain amount. But part of that is making sure it gets spent. So if the funds aren't spent in a timely manner, we won't continue to do this. So far, CAMPO has done a phenomenal job spending the money. So if you look at a different allocation or certain promises to different regions, I understand the fairness of that, but we don't want to run the risk of not spending the funds and having those decisions on where the funds are going come back and up. So that's just a heads up in terms of our perspective. Lucia mentioned a call for projects and kind of do a competitive basis. That's another option as well. So we won't get involved in how it's distributed amongst the member agencies, but I just wanted to give you that bit of background on it.
Yeah, and I guess my suggestion would be that we know in advance that this pool of money is available, so I would ask Lyon and Douglas counties, to make sure that they have projects available to use this money on. So Bob, I don't mind going forward if Lyon County gets some credit for this, but at the same time, I don't want Carson City to get penalized because we have projects ready and somehow, Lyon County wasn't able to bring a project forward. It is a lot of money to give up.
Yeah. I completely agree, Brad. I'm 100% on board with that.
Any other comments? Seeing none, call for public comment.
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the board for any more discussion or a motion. Go ahead.
Okay. I move to approve the reallocation of the Surface Transportation Program block grant funds between the 3 member agencies of the Carson Area Metropolitan Planning Organization as presented.
I have a motion, a second. Second, Brad.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous. Go to item 6B. Discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 two-year Unified Planning Work Program. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. CAMPO receives annual funding from the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration for regional transportation planning activities. Together, these 2 funding sources are termed Consolidated Planning Grant funding, and those are used to reimburse MPO staff and related planning activities at a rate of 95% for eligible activities that are consistent with an approved Unified Planning Work Program. Although CAMPO may approved a 2-year Unified Planning Work Program, as we have done the past couple years, it is not allowed to charge for tasks or be reimbursed for any federal funding beyond what is obligated for a given fiscal year. So this item 6B tonight is for consideration of approval of a 2-year Unified Planning Work Program. The benefits of a 2-year work program are that staff are able to plan more longer term. Because we don't get a ton of planning funding under this program, having a 2-year document allows us to sometimes save a little bit and do a little bit of a bigger initiative later, and really kind of explain to you, the board, and the public what we're doing long-term with CAMPO. We're planners, so we plan. The draft UPWP was prepared and was provided to FHWA and NDOT for comment. And a public comment period, a 30-day public comment period meeting the requirements in the public participation plan was open and met those requirements. It was open from March 26th through April 24th. No public comments were received. Federal Highway Administration did comment, and I'll touch on this a bit later, that the new format of the UPWP was acceptable to them conceptually. We also received comments provided by NDOT, which are summarized in the table on packet page 14. Those minor refinements and updates were made based on the comments received by NDOT and are included in the Unified Planning Work Program presented to you within this packet. Approval of the 2-year work program will allow staff to complete the activities described for both fiscal years as provided within. The budget for fiscal year 21 is $440,284, which requires that 5% local match of $22,014 distributed across the partner agencies. That distribution is shown in the table in the packet, and that was based on a population at the time a few years ago. It's a percent that we've used for a while. That's what that is. I would like to draw your attention to packet page number 51, which is the funding summary table. For the most part, because CAMPO doesn't have a ton of money, our activities are fairly routine. In the past, you may recall, we had the same funding summary table in the fiscal year 20 UPWP, and we had approximately 18 different task numbers, and each of them had individual budgets. Those budgets sometimes were as small as $7,000, and the administrative time to manage each of those budgets and report back to NDOT was, it got to a point where it was diminishing returns. So in this year's 2-year UPWP, staff had proposed consolidating those budgets into 4 work element budgets. So you'll see that change in here in this budget here. It's really for ease of management. We did also change this summary table a little bit to add in the milestones and the completion dates, so staff are a little bit more transparent and accountable to what we're doing within those work elements. So key work elements within this 2-year work program include adoption of the next Unified Planning Work Program, which will happen in May of 22, the annual monetary agreement, which you'll see in the next agenda item this evening, which actually then supports the money to fund this program, an adoption of a transportation improvement program document, which is our funding document for what we do regionally, and some annual things. On the transit side, we've budgeted for a rider survey and a non-rider survey. We do these every few years. You've seen them before, so those are in there. And some other items which were included in the Transit Development and Coordinated Human Services Plan from last fall, which includes establishment of a CAMPO coordination coalition for transit and regional transit providers, establishment of a transit ambassador pilot program, as well as a JAC ADA paratransit eligibility process. Staff are working on the draft 2050 regional transportation plan, so that is anticipated to be adopted this fall in September or October. And then we're looking at potentially doing a local road safety plan for Carson City. This is a fairly new concept and something we haven't done here, but something staff are interested in pursuing. In Carson City, as you know, the South Carson Street project is part of that 8-cent infrastructure sales tax for Carson City, and there were 4 corridors identified for complete streets improvements. Downtown was completed in 2016. South Carson is ongoing now. William Street is the next one. There was a Greening America's Capital conceptual corridor study that was completed a few years ago. Part of that study looked at a road diet and some different concepts. Traffic patterns and volumes coming into Carson City from Dayton have increased substantially since then, and staff aren't sure anymore whether that road diet makes sense. And so we'd like to advance design in the William Street project, which is next, and build off that older study and make sure that we're all still moving in the right direction. So you'll see that in here as well. Performance-based planning is in here. You'll see some target setting activities, as well as the annual monitoring report that we started this past year. It's Carson City's turn for a pavement survey. We did Douglas County last year. And then an expanded ADA inventory of narrowness barriers, which builds upon the recently adopted ADA transition plan for public facilities in Carson City's right-of-way. That was a mouthful. I did want to note that CAMPO staff solicited requests to all partner jurisdictions to add planning tasks and milestones to the 2-year work program. Specifically, I reached out to Douglas County and Lyon County staff. This past year, we did do the pavement survey in Douglas County, but we haven't done a lot in Lyon County in a long time. Staff did complete digitization of the ADA assets in Lyon County. We inventoried and digitized the sidewalks and the curb ramps and those types of assets, so that was included, but we haven't done a lot. However, Lyon County wasn't able to come up with anything for inclusion in this draft UPWP. That said, if something does come up, I always want to include the partner agencies. So if something comes up, I think we could probably rejigger some tasks or rebudget for those in the second year of this UPWP. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Question to staff, Brad, go ahead.
Lucia, I believe that on the title page, page 1, the date should be fiscal years 2021, 2022, July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2022. And then same correction to the date on page 4, fourth line down, should say July 1, 2020 through June 30, 2022.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments, I guess? None here, any on the screen?
Yeah, from the chat, I have a couple. On page 7 of the document, you still got Brad down as vice chair of CAMPO. Is that correct? I thought that Greg was now.
I can't, did anybody get that? I didn't get, I'm sorry, Chaz, you're gonna have to repeat that.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but
Okay, so on table 1.1 on page 7, it has Brad as the vice chair of CAMPO, and Greg is now, right?
Oh, I lost my title.
You're the chair.
Got vice chair.
Am I making sense here?
It should be Greg.
It should be Greg. We'll make that correction. Thank you, Chaz.
Okay, and then I did have a question about the percentage split between the partners. It's different from the STBG split, not by a lot, but by like 4% for Carson City. And I'm assuming that's a difference of some timing in the population measurement, but which is the most common?
I appreciate the question. I will have to confirm and get back to you all. I don't want to misspeak. There's 2 working hypotheses right now. One is the years in which these agreements were created that may have been different populations. The other is a text I received from Mr. Goring that suggested that STBG was just the urban area and the UPWP would be all CAMPO. But if it's okay with you all, I will confirm and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, good with me. That was all I had.
Thanks, Chaz. Anybody else? Seeing none, call for any public comment.
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bring it back to the board for either a motion or any other discussion.
I'll make a motion. I move to approve the fiscal year 2021 and fiscal year 2022 2-year unified planning work program as amended.
Are we clear on the amendment? The dates that he made? Okay,
And changing my name and Greg's name.
okay, all right. All right, that makes sense. So I have a motion. I have a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries unanimous. 6B is done. Move to 6C. For possible action, discussion and possible action to authorize the transportation manager to sign agreement number PR 204-20-804 for commitment to complete the fiscal year 2021 Unified Planning Work Program activities and to authorize the transportation manager to sign future amendments to this agreement regarding time extensions or change in value of the funding up to 10% of the initial funding amount. Lucia, again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the annual monetary amount. So once we approve a Unified Planning Work Program, we enter into an agreement with NDOT to facilitate transfer, essentially, of those planning funds. The fiscal impact of this, the local match is 5%. As I mentioned earlier, it's $22,014 for fiscal year '21, distributed across the member agencies as shown in the table in the staff report. Typically, staff send out the invoices for the local share sometime in the fall. I always want to thank the partner jurisdictions. They're always really quick to respond to those invoices and make sure that we have that local match within the fund. So I won't go into detail too much, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Any questions, staff?
And so the dates on this are just through June 30, 2021, right? Because it's the
That's correct.
application.
Just the 1 year.
Anybody have a other question? Seeing no excitement from the screen? We'll ask for public comment.
There's no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Bring it back for a motion or any other discussion.
I'll do the motion. I move to authorize the transportation manager to sign agreement number PR 204-20-804 as presented, and to authorize the transportation manager to sign future amendments to this agreement regarding time extensions or a change in value of the funding up to 10% of the initial funding amount.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second, Lori. Any other discussion? Hearing none, I call for the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No opposed. Unanimous again. So 6C's passed. Staff summary. Now we go to board comments. So I'll start with the screen. Any board comments? How about I'll call your name. John, any comments? John?
None for me.
Okay. Bob, do you have any comment? I'm sorry.
None for me, thank you.
All right. Sandra?
None for me, thanks.
Todd, you can't say anything. I'm sorry. Chaz, do you have any comments?
No.
All right. So I'll be back here. Lori, any comments? Brad, any comments? Greg, any comments? I have no comments. The next meeting's scheduled for Wednesday. No, it's not. Actually, it's next week, so I'm not going to say that, I guess. Our next scheduled monthly meeting is June 10th, but we have a special meeting here coming next week. Last chance for public comment. Is there any public comment? Go ahead, Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. I believe I spoke with all the board members today. CAMPO staff have been working with NDOT to secure an additional $40,000 to support update of our travel demand model and completion of the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. That draft agreement has come through, and we've submitted final comments on that agreement back to NDOT staff. I am cautiously optimistic that NDOT staff can turn that around into a format that's ready for approval. And I have tentatively scheduled a special meeting of the CAMPO board next Friday, May 22nd at 8:30 a.m. This will be a single agenda item meeting. I hope to have you in and out of there in about 15, 20 minutes, but I'm generally pretty optimistic. So I've booked you a half hour on your calendars. If you have any more questions on that, please let me know. NDOT staff have been incredibly helpful at trying to find that money and support our staff to make sure our regional transportation plan is really comprehensive and really great. So that's the agenda item, and you'll see more information about that come through. The agenda will be posted for public comment and all that good stuff by next Monday at close of business. Thank you.
Well, thank you to staff for working hard on this and making sure that happens. And thanks to Sonder for NDOT support on this too. So thank you for that opportunity to take a few minutes of your 15 minutes you promised. We'll see. It shouldn't take that long. So I'll call again for public comments because I didn't hear back.
There's no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So call for adjournment. So moved? Okay, so moved. We're adjourned. When does RDC want to meet? All right, 5 o'clock, 4 more minutes, I guess. Thank you. Yeah, actually, we can't move anyway.
Call to order this meeting of the Carson City Regional Transportation Commission. Today is Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. We are at 851 East William Street in the Sierra Room of the Carson City Community Center, as well
Can't
as
hear you.
online.
Can't hear you remotely.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hear you now.
Okay, so I'll speak closer to the mic. We have a notice to the public to read into the record. Notice to the public, the state of Nevada and Carson City are currently in a declared state of emergency in response to the global pandemic caused by the coronavirus infectious disease outbreak. In accordance with the governor's declaration of emergency directive 006, which has suspended the provisions of NRS 241.2020, requiring the designation of a physical location for meetings of public bodies where members of the public are permitted to attend and participate. Public meetings of Carson City will not have a physical location open to the public until such time this directive is removed. Members of the public who wish to participate during a public meeting may do so by providing public comment during the 2 designated public comment periods indicated on the agenda via video conference or telephonic appearance. To video conference, you must have access to an internet connection and a computer equipped with a camera and microphone with which you can join a meeting at the link posted in the agenda. To join by telephone, you must dial 408-418-3988. You may also provide public comment in advance of a meeting by written submission to the following email address, lmaloney@carson.org. For inclusion or reference in the minutes of a meeting, your public comment must include your full name and be submitted via email by not later than 3 p.m. the day before the date of the meeting. Thank you for bearing with me on that. We will now go to our regular agenda with item number 1, roll call. Tamara?
Chair Bonkowski.
Here.
Vice Chair Kimbrough. Here. Commissioner Bagwell. Here. Commissioner McQuarrie. I know you're there. Commissioner Stedfield? Yep. A quorum's present.
Thank you. We are on agenda item number 2, agenda management notice. Do we have any changes to the agenda tonight?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Any changes from any of the members online? I see shaking heads. Any changes from anybody here in the room? All right, so we will adopt the agenda as published. Item number 3 on the agenda, disclosures. Any member of the RTC that has a disclosure tonight? Nope, no disclosures. We are now on agenda item number 4, public comment, the first public comment period. So we will take public comment at this time, and then we will take it again at the end of the meeting and not on individual items. Is there any public comment at this time?
I see no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We are now on agenda item number 5, approval of the minutes for possible action, discussion and possible approval of the April 8th, 2020 draft minutes. If the members have read the minutes, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the April 8th, 2020 minutes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The minutes are approved. We're on agenda item 6A for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding the allocation of additional federal fiscal year 2020 surface transportation block grant funds and any remaining or unused fiscal year 2019 STBG funds to the Colorado Street Rehabilitation Project. Lucia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Staff have been working on a Colorado Street Rehabilitation Project, which includes ADA improvements and sidewalk improvements on Colorado Street, as well as turning north up California Street. There's some, drainage improvements, some asphalt work that needs to be done. The RTC board took action several months ago to approve pursuit of this project and submittal of a community development block grant application for that project. as well as to use $150,000 in RTC funding to complement that project with additional roadway rehabilitation work. Earlier this evening, the CAMPO board took action to reallocate some surface transportation block grant funding that Lyon County could not use, and they took action to let Carson City use that funding. Staff are proposing to use that funding on this Colorado Street project. Community Development Block Grant Funds, the CDBG funds, were approved for this project by the Board of Supervisors in the amount of $340,868 at their last meeting. Staff are proposing to partner those funds with Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds. CDBG is unique in that it's able to be used as a match to other federal funding sources. So through the matching and Carson City's use of STBG, it's not going to require any additional regional transportation funds. So staff are proposing with the action this evening, we would no longer need that $150,000 that had been previously approved from the Regional Transportation Fund, and instead we would use the CDBG as well as Lyon County's portion of the STBG, which CAMPO took action on earlier, as well as any unused funds from fiscal year 19 to roll those into this project as well and stretch the project as far as we can. Typically, we try to be scalable with our projects, so we'll go as far as we can once we start doing design. We've not done the geotechnical work yet, so we don't have a clear understanding of what type of asphalt improvements are needed. As we move forward on this project, we'll get a better understanding of that design and be able to report back to you on the extent of the project as we move forward. The explanation of fiscal impact, STBG funding does require a 5% local match. The amount was included in the staff report. However, as I previously noted, the local match will be overmatched with community development block grant funding. So happy to answer any additional questions you might have. Thanks.
Any questions for Lucia? Chaz? Any questions, Chaz?
No.
Okay. I do have a question, Lucia. If we have prior authorization to use up to $150,000, would it be your intent then to use some of that money to complete the project if you run short of funds? So if you use the CBDG and the STBG funds, and then you have an additional authorization for up to $150,000, that would allow you to complete the project? Is that the intent?
There is more work in this corridor than we can afford to do. So we're starting the project at California to the west and going as far towards Solomon on the east as we can go. I'm not convinced at this point that that additional $150,000 will allow us to reconstruct that whole road. As you know, you could land an airplane on Colorado Street, and we get a lot of complaints about speeding. I've asked staff to look at whether it would make sense to make this more of a parkway, similar to East 5th Street over there, past the roundabout, with maybe some landscaping in the middle, get rid of some asphalt that needs to be maintained. Of course, there's maintenance trade-offs with that. So we're going to look at what we can do with the potential for reduced revenues for this upcoming fiscal year. My recommendation would be to release those funds now, and when staff come back to RTC in August for the District 3 projects, we can determine, we'll have a better idea of the design of this, and staff can make a recommendation if we think we need that here, if it could be better be spent somewhere else. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, since I have two Board of Supervisors here, how are you guys handling these commitments, knowing that in the future there might be some serious problems with having to unfund or, so I hope transportation's pretty high on the list, but you can't make that promise now. But, so it's just, you know, this package here, there's a couple other items in that package too, just as a mystery to me, how this is gonna come forward when you guys know you have to meet and talk about some cuts here. I don't know when, but
Right, so
eventually.
the city's policy has been that we cut out funding for some proposed capital improvement projects, and we froze hiring. Other than that, we really didn't make any significant changes to the budget, and we are going to look at the revenue figures on a month-to-month basis And then we will have an opportunity probably in August, right, to adjust the budget if needed. So our policy is that we want to make decisions based on real data, not just throwing darts today on projections.
So let me throw this, since these matches are usually a high percentage on the fewer dollars for the city for a large return, I assume they'll stay high on the list, because if you give up 15,000, you might end up giving $250,000 away. So I hope that as this moves forward, transportation stays high and these matches become a really important element to that discussion. So I don't know how, Lucia can't come and lobby. It's not part of the structure of government, but I hope RTC can help, even though there's two board of supervisors here. If it need be, this board can maybe help support Lucia in that. I don't know how it works because there's two of you.
I don't mind commenting a little bit. We did in the budget already reduce the gas tax revenues, as you've stated. So we already projected for this next fiscal year a reduction, and then scaled the projects based on that reduction. So I think our hope is that we were very conservative, which meant we took a big hit in the revenue, that it comes the other way on the monthly and we're able to add projects. That I would say that that's what your Board of Supervisors did, is we took a very conservative approach and really reduced the revenues, and our hope is it goes the other direction. But certainly when you start scoping what you can save and what you have to cut, it's an obvious thing. Am I going to lose more revenue and take a deeper cut? Then that's one of the decision factors you start using to make your decision is, oh, wait a minute. If I'm going to give up 100,000 to save 15,000, that might not be a good or a wise choice. So I think everything will go on a chalkboard, and that's what you start doing. It's just exactly what you're saying. You start weighing it.
I have
It's not
empathy for
good.
you guys, tough decisions, so, but it's kind of our job transportation is something we trumpet for and hope to support as much as we can and how we can. So however that fits into structure, I would like to participate in that.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
And I have another comment just on this one. So I do get a lot of calls and complaints and issues continually on Colorado, both about its need for repair and the speed limits. And I'm not sure that one of them might be slightly related, that the cracks are so bad and the people are going so fast on it, they can hear that click, 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 click. So maybe if we fix it, some of the other complaints will go away. But I heard that you indicated you may even look for slight design changes on that. Are you going to involve the residents in that discussion off of Colorado? I know it's not a major project or something of that nature, but I think it would be wonderful if you can even just have a little community meeting of the residents in that area to get any ideas that they might have, because I don't know whether you get a lot of complaints about Colorado Street, but it's the number one, it's not, well, half of it's in my ward and the other half is in someone else's ward, so I feel like I'm getting both halves of the complaint. But if we could work together with those residents and even let them know that we're going to be doing a project, it would be great.
In light of your comments and Supervisor Bonkowski's comments, I might recommend that once staff get a little bit down the road with maybe some preliminary design, maybe we bring it back to RTC. I'm aware of a couple residents that have reached out to me. Maybe we invite them specifically and have a little public hearing and get some comments. If we're looking at changing the character of that road at all, I think it's important that staff get some outside feedback.
I would love that. Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions or comments, Chaz?
No.
Thank you. Okay, any remaining discussion on this? If not, I'll bring it back to the board and ask for a motion.
You want to talk to the public?
No, we're only taking the public in the beginning and the end.
Okay, I'll do it.
So this is a different structure.
Yeah.
I moved,
Thank you.
sorry. I move to allocate all available federal fiscal year 2020 surface transportation block grant funds and any remaining and unused federal fiscal year 2019 surface transportation block grant funds to the Colorado Street Rehabilitation Project as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. All right, we are now on agenda item 6B for possible action. Discussion and possible action regarding a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on the fiscal year 2021 budgets for the regional transportation, transit, CAMPO, and street maintenance funds. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Typically, we like to have this item. This is really an administrative item where the delegated authorities that have come from the Board of Supervisors to RTC are utilized, and RTC is able to make a recommendation on the next fiscal year's budget to the Board of Supervisors. Please accept my apologies. In this case, with current events this year, we're a little bit backwards. The Board of Supervisors has reviewed the tentative budget and provided comments on this. The budget that's included in your staff report is the same as what was provided to the Board of Supervisors at their April 16th meeting. The tentative budget, I will let you know, was filed with the state on April 15th. It has been open for public review and comments since then. We have gotten comments regarding revenues, which have been reduced conservatively in light of current events. Our CFO, the city CFO, estimates approximately 40% reduction in revenues for gas tax for March and April. And that reduction is for fiscal year 20. We're looking at slightly less reductions in May and June, and then continuing those reductions through fiscal year 21. So that's how the revenues were projected for the gas tax. Sales tax was similar. We assumed a 26% reduction in May, a 10% reduction in June, and again, continuing those. As Supervisor Bonkowski mentioned earlier, the Board of Supervisors has requested monthly information on revenues from the city's finance department, so that's something that staff are monitoring really closely. I talked to the CFO this afternoon, and she mentioned that in the draft fiscal year 21 budget, there was an estimate of a 10% increase in health insurance that would have impacted our funds. And we learned recently that that increase, which is generally kind of standard, it's a conservative assumption, is not going to happen this year. So from the draft budget to now, we've made up a little bit of money. So that has helped us, and those savings have translated into these budgets. Going through, starting on packet page number 13 is the Regional Transportation Fund, the 250 fund. A couple notes on this. The revenue assumptions I noted to you. There is a duplicate row of the Infrastructure Tax Fund, which is a revenue account in there. I will make that comment to the Finance Department. I believe that's just a typo. One of those rows is all zeros. There is also a few typos within these sheets that I've already made the comment to Finance, so they are aware of those as well. On the Regional Transportation Fund, I did want to highlight down on packet page number 15, there is a project called the Transportation Infrastructure. This is typically the account that we use to budget for our performance district projects. You'll see in this row just $64,311. What we did this year in this budget, if you look up on packet page number 14, there is a capital project called Pavement Preserve Microsurfacing that has budgeted $844,500. That's a placeholder for the District 3 projects. So just so you know, we'll have those two numbers, the 844 and the 64, available for our projects that staff will bring back pursuant to the payment management schedule. Generally, we do that in August. So just so you know, that's kind of what we're looking at for the District 3. And that's consistent roughly with what we assumed for fiscal year 20, which was $850,000. So we'll see how the revenues come in. We've set ourselves up really well, and that we're always kind of, the budget gets approved, but we start doing our projects that fall. And so we are always nimble and scalable with our projects. So as revenues come in, when we bring those projects, we'll always bring more than we can fund. we'll start design, sure. And then if revenues start coming in lower, we'll cut from the bottom and we'll prioritize those projects. So that project list we bring to you in August, we'll have those priorities and we'll get that in the motion where if revenues come in less, you all have had a say in what gets cut or if anything gets cut, if that makes sense. Any questions on Regional Transportation Fund?
So with the system that's in place, that you do different parts of the city, different places. So the group this year didn't quite get their bang for the buck then, I guess that.
So this fiscal year 20 is District 2, which is downtown. Fortunately, we had a fair bit of surface transportation block grant funding that we used for a Northridge rehabilitation project. We also infused a significant amount of STBG on the Fairview job. We're doing some, South Carson. So it did balance out a little bit. We'll see how things end up, but we're okay with District 2. I'm a little bit more concerned about District 3. We'll see how it goes. District 3 is East Carson, so Pinion Hills, Silver Saddle, down Edmonds, Gentry, and then down over to like Snyder, Schultz Ranch area. So staff have some projects tentatively identified to bring to you for consideration. But again, we'll have to scale that depending on how much revenue comes in.
Just a comment.
Sure.
So this, Mark, if you look at the very first line of the budget document, that will display to you, if you look at the last number of 3,754,000, you can see we actually are almost copying fiscal year 18. So that's how much reduction. So like you said, we are taking a $300,000 reduction this fiscal year and then carrying that on into the next fiscal year. So that's, like you said, about a $600,000 hit in the revenue. That shows you what we're projecting. So again, hopefully it comes in
If you throw
higher.
in the matches that you usually get, that even makes it look a lot worse. Well, it's expected and understandable.
Yep.
If you look at packet page number 16, we also included the fiscal summary for this fund. And one thing I wanted to note on that summary is the intergovernmental. For 1920 estimated, you see about $12 million in there. That came from the state transfer of funding for South Carson Street for that relinquishment of that facility by them. So that's the difference. It's not that staff have stopped seeking revenue. That's just why it went so high to so low. Moving forward to packet page number 17, transit has remained, for the most part, the same. We assumed the same general fund transfer, which is here kind of a third of the way down on packet page 17, which was $466,300. That's the general fund transfer labeled as CCFTA 5307 Ops Match. So we use that money as match for our FTA grants. The FTA grants in the city budget right now in this tentative final budget is essentially maintains the course. It does not include the CARES Act grant that we were recently awarded. It's a supplemental, CARES is a little bit supplemental, but also we have way more FTA dollars than we can utilize with our local funding, our match funds available. So there's a backlog of federal funds that we can use. So the numbers in here from the federal and state grants equate to what we think we can spend with the local match available. Happy to answer more questions on that if needed. I also wanted to highlight the operating contract expense account, about halfway down packet page 17. We budgeted $839,397. I did want to note that Carson City staff have put out an RFP for a contract operator. That RFP will be closing at 2 p.m. on June 2nd. We don't know yet how the bids will come in. So that will obviously come to this board for approval, but consider that number as tentative based on what we've been paying with our current contract. Down at the bottom for transit, we have assumed $330,000 for vehicle replacement. That is on schedule with our transit asset management plan. Staff will be bringing back a future agenda item related to the CARES grant and some of the direction we've gotten from our FTA representative to consider moving up some of our vehicle replacements with the CARES grant, which will be 100% federally funded. So that number that's in this budget is, maintaining the course, not necessarily the CARES Act. There is a fiscal summary for transit also in here, but not much that I was going to go into unless you had questions on the transit fund. Great. The CAMPO fund on packet page 19, I'm not going to go into details on that. This is consistent with the Unified Planning Work Program and monetary agreement that the CAMPO board approved earlier this evening. And on packet page number 21 is the Streets Maintenance Fund. This fund is managed by Rick Cooley, the Public Works Operation Manager, but it is funded through fuel tax and county option BCCRT, which is sales tax. I mentioned the assumptions on the reductions earlier. For the most part, we are substantially underfunded in streets maintenance, but our guys do the best that we can do with the money that we have. So we looked at what we had anticipated coming in, and it's stay the course and do as much as we can with what we have. There's also a fiscal summary for that streets maintenance fund, which I included, but for the most part, things again are staying the course. Happy to answer questions on that if you have them. Excellent. So that concludes my presentation. Again, the recommended action this evening is to recommend approval of these budgets to the Board of Supervisors. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Any questions from any of the members? Any questions, Chaz?
Just a comment, Brad. My original question was Mark asked and what Lucia and Laurie answered. So I think the board of supervisors and staff have done a good job being conservative going forward, and hopefully, as Laurie says, revenues will come in a bit above the conservative estimate. So I think that's a wise way to proceed. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. Any questions in the room? All right, then I'll bring this back and entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion. I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of the fiscal year 2021 budgets for the regional transportation, transit, CAMPO, and street maintenance funds.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. Votes 5-0 for approval. We are now on agenda item 6C for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a determination that Sierra Nevada Construction, Inc. is the lowest responsive and responsible bidder pursuant to NRS Chapter 338 and to award contract number 193-00161 Salomon Road and Russell Way Preservation Project to Sierra Nevada Construction, Inc. for a total not to exceed amount of $463,657.70 to be funded from the Regional Transportation Fund. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris Martinovich, Transportation Engineer. Just wanted to touch on this project. So the project generally includes the pavement preservation using a Type 3 modified rapid setting slurry on Solomon Road and on Russell Way. These were originally two projects that we combined into one project for bidding due to the proximity of the two projects and the relative size being relatively small of Russell Way. So they've been combined into one project. Also want to note that we are including in this, as part of the Solomon portion, a new RRFB, or rectangular rapid flashing beacon, at the linear ditch crossing right there south of Fremont. So that's included in this as well as a mill and overlay for some settling of the waterline trench between Robinson and Mills Park there. So that's included in this as well. I do want to note the construction amount is $463,657. The engineer's estimate listed here on the staff summary was $446. That actually did not include the 10% contingency. So if we include the 10% contingency on top of the engineer's estimate, we're actually under the engineer's estimate, which is what we're generally shooting for there. So just want to mention that. I also want to mention this project includes the award of two alternate bid items. One of those bid items is to do kind of a test of some roller compaction on the slurry at the bike lane. And so we've heard some complaints where the joints kind of come together. I think Chaz has mentioned this before, kind of where that joint is at the bike lane. We want to try to get that slurry leveler. And so we're looking to do some testing with a vibratory roller to see how that joint can be smoothed out in the bike lane area.
Did you hear that, Chaz?
Okay, excellent. So that's this item. If I think if anyone else has any questions, we're recommending approval.
Any questions?
I had one. I was looking at the bid tab. And, where was it? Oh, so we only got one bidder on this one?
We only got one bidder on this one, yes.
Okay. I mean, obviously, there's nothing else in there, but I was just kind of surprised that,
I believe this went to bid in late February, so I'm not sure how things related, but only the one bidder, SNC.
Well, considering the amount of work that Sierra Nevada Construction is doing in Carson City right now, I'm glad they were the one bidder.
Yep.
yeah, that's all I have.
Any additional questions or comments from anybody? Seeing none, I'll bring this back to the board and entertain a motion, or commission, I should say.
I move to award contract number 193-00161 as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. The motion passes 5-0. We will move on to agenda item 6D for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a determination that Sierra Nevada Construction, Inc. is the lowest responsive and responsible bidder pursuant to NRS Chapter 338 and to award contract 193-00154 Roop Street Pavement Micro Surfacing Project to Sierra Nevada Construction, Inc. for a total not to exceed amount of $257,407.70 to be funded with V&T infrastructure funds. Chris, this is also yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very similar type project. This is for the pavement preservation of Roop Street between Robinson and Hot Springs Road. It also includes some pavement patching up near, between Northridge and Hot Springs, right there near the gas station. There's some deteriorated pavement. We're going to go ahead and patch some of those areas. Other than that, I did want to mention that the engineer's estimate on this one did include the 10% contingency, so the 270 was the engineer's estimate with the 10%. We received 3 bids on this, as mentioned. Sierra Nevada Construction is the low bidder, and we're recommending award. Again, this project is funded out of the V&T Infrastructure Fund.
Any questions for Chris on this contract? Go ahead, Greg.
So on a project of this type where we're basically doing a seal with some patching, I'm assuming that we had plans for this scope of work?
Yes, we've developed plans for the scope of work, including limits of construction and signing and striping.
Okay. So the only reason I'm asking is I was looking at bid item 3, and the pavement patch is like 6/12, which is pretty stout. Was that based on what's already there? Is that the existing section?
I believe, I'd have to check with the project manager specifically on the section. I believe there's been some patching done in the past, and my recollection after coordinating with him was that was what was used, but I need to confirm that with the project manager.
Okay, that's fine. It just seems like it's really, I mean, for a 12-inch AB section, I would think you'd probably have about a 4-inch AC. So that's just why it kind of surprised me. That's it.
I will confirm.
Walmart had a blue light special on asphalt this week. Oh, wait a minute, I'm mixing my retailers up.
It's just me geeking out on a bid tab, that's all.
Any additional comments or questions on this contract? Hearing and seeing none, I will bring this back to the commission and entertain a motion.
You gonna do it, Greg?
I think I can handle this one. I move to award contract 193-00154 as presented.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion is approved 5-0. And we will move to the last action item on the agenda tonight, item 6C. Sorry, not an action item, for information only. Information and discussion on the recently implemented speed limit policy that sets forth guidelines for establishing and reviewing speed limits on new and existing roadways within Carson City. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd ask, do I need to do anything specific to get this to display?
Yeah, we got to kick Chaz off the monitor.
Uh-oh. Okay. So I just have a brief presentation on this item to kind of give the highlights of the policy as implemented. So I'll just kind of walk through some of those, and at the end, if we have questions during or at the end, we can go over those. So I'll just give a little background here. So speed limits are generally a balance between safety and mobility. Lower speed limits tend to be a little bit safer, and higher speed limits tend to provide a lot more mobility and accelerate getting people to where they want to go. They're ultimately a very complex and subjective, process as to setting and establishing what a speed limit is. Different agencies, different engineers, the individual drivers all have a different perception of what a speed limit should be and how you should drive down the road. There is no specific singular national guidance or manual or process for setting and evaluating and establishing a speed limit. There are some existing laws. NRS has numerous laws, as well as Carson City Code 10.20.010, which basically says, in part, unless posted otherwise, the speed limit in Carson City is 25 miles an hour. So if the road doesn't have a posted speed limit, then the assumption is it's 25 miles an hour. So how do we select how you drive? And essentially that's up to each driver. Each driver, like I said, kind of picks the speed in which they drive. And so there's different factors that affect how fast somebody travels down the road. And some of those factors are listed here. Roadway geometry, right? So what is the characteristic of the road? How many lanes does it have? What are its roadside conditions? Are there horizontal curves? Are there vertical curves? Are there elements that would affect the driver's choice? Traffic volumes. Busier roads tend to operate at lower speeds than roads with less volume. Roadway function. Is the road intended to function from, between cities, between destinations, between high generation points, or is it meant to serve as a local street where it's got numerous driveways and people entering and exiting? And of course, weather affects the speed and age and ability. And so all those factors kind of go into how a driver selects the speed that they drive. And so here's two pictures, right? You've got Carson Street, and then you've got just kind of a rural highway. And both of these roads from a geometric standpoint are very similar. They're very straight, they're relatively flat. And so there are other factors here that kind of allow the driver to choose the speed that they want to drive. Traffic being one, a lot of the roadside and functionality of the road being others. So you can kind of see the similar geometric conditions, but I know I personally would drive certainly faster on the lower picture than the upper picture. So why establish a policy? So the general process and goal of establishing a policy is to outline a consistent, data-driven methodology for Carson City such that we can be transparent and knowledgeable and consistent across the city on how speed limits are set and established. And so the recommendations in this policy are generally based on a multitude of sources, including the Federal Highway Administration that have, I think, 2 or 3 different manuals on speed limits. The Transportation Research Board, which does a lot of research into what different agencies do and things like that, as well as NDOT and Caltrans and some of the other agencies nearby. This policy generally has 2 parts. The first part is relate to how a speed limit is established on a new facility, and the second part is how we review and potentially modify speed limits on our existing roads. So I'm going to touch on the first part briefly. We don't probably do too many new roads in Carson City, but every once in a while we get a new facility or an expansion of a facility or something like that. So generally for new roads, you want to kind of target what speed you anticipate the majority of the drivers to drive at, and that's called kind of the target speed. So if you're going to design a road, where do you think people are going to drive, how do you want them to drive? And so the example here is you have a collector, you kind of anticipate people driving on that collector in a range of 25 to 35 miles an hour. So you want to also consider the roadway's function, right? So if you have a facility that's got a lot of residential streets and a lot of residential driveways, that facility's going to have a target speed that's expected to be less than a facility like US 50 or something like that that has a lot of connection and regional linkages. So then once you kind of get your target speed, you want to select design speed, and that design speed tends to be at the upper end of that target speed. And that design speed is the critical element, not to get too technically deep here, but design speed sets the criteria for designing the road. And so you need to establish a design speed to figure out how your road's going to fit in a footprint standpoint. Ultimately then, using that, you kind of back down to your speed limit. So in this example, you have a design speed of 35 and you'd set your speed limit at 30, which is right in the mid-range of your target speed. So kind of moving to the second part here is the process for reviewing existing speed limits on our existing roadways. And so the first part to that is to establish when is it appropriate to review and do a study on a speed limit for a road. And so there's some criteria we've kind of established here. First is looking at lane configuration. Has the road had changes to the lane configuration? Did we add lanes? Did we reduce lanes? Are there new bike lanes? Things like that. Have there been changes to on-street parking or new driveways or a reduction of driveways? Have there been changes to traffic control, new signals, new stop signs, a reduction of signals or stop signs? Changes to traffic volume. Is there a new development that's added volume? Is there a new freeway that's open that's maybe reduced the volume? Or items such as severity and changes to the crashes. Have there been fatal crashes? Have there been an increase to the number of crashes in a particular area of the road? So those are kind of the factors where we consider if a speed review needs to be conducted. Assuming that one does, then this is the general process. So this flow chart kind of outlines the process. So the first step is to collect data. And we want to obtain the 85th percentile speed, or the speed at which 85% of the vehicles are traveling, as well as the vehicle pace, which is roughly a 10 mile an hour speed window that most of the vehicles are traveling within. Then we want to review the roadway geometry, some of those factors I mentioned earlier, like the roadside characteristics, the curvature, the lane configuration. Then we want to go into what's the functional class of the road. Is it an arterial? Is it a collector? What's it meant to serve? What is it serving? Review the crash data, pull the information from NDOT. Consult with the sheriff's office to see if a change is made, is it enforceable? Have they had problems with enforcement? Kind of get their opinion on how the road's operating from that perspective. And then lastly, we'll complete the study and eventually set the speed limit. And maybe that means we confirm that the existing speed limit's fine, and maybe that means we need to make an adjustment to the speed limit. Ultimately, the process is to start with the 85th percentile speed. And so we're taking that speed as our base factor, and we're going to modify that based on those geometric constraints, the safety constraints, and the enforcement factors to adjust that speed potentially downward, but could go upward as well. The MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, indicates that generally speed limits should be posted within 5 miles an hour of the 85th percentile speed. So our policy says the speed limit shall be posted to the 5 mile per hour increment closest to that, rounded down. So an example is if we do a speed study and we get an 85th percentile speed of 33 miles an hour, there's no other factors that would affect that, we're going to set the speed limit based on this policy at 30 miles an hour for that facility. So this table here kind of shows how a comparison of some of the other agencies, both local and state agencies, and how they kind of set some speed limit. And so you can see it's kind of a wide variety of ideas and methods. There's no one single method, and the different percentages of our different agencies tend to vary. So the last thing I want to mention is part of the policy, some additional considerations. We've got some sections in there related to special speed zones, and those can include school zones, which are 15 mile an hour areas, advisory zones, which are areas, say your road has a tight horizontal curve and you put up a yellow sign to say slow down to get through this curve, but in general the road's okay. Or there could be like a pedestrian advisory, like the sign there on the presentation, or you've got a couple of crosswalks, but in general the road doesn't have any pedestrians except for a limited area. We also have sections on work zones and how to address speeds through those, and then pedestrian safety zones, which is an NRS kind of defined term that has some specific requirements for when and how they should be implemented. And the last part of the speed limit policy is the sign placement. And so generally, speed limit signs should be placed after intersections of major streets where their speed limits are required to change because the road changes in some fashion at our city limits, as well as needed to kind of remind drivers of those locations where maybe we don't have any intersections. So it still makes sense to erect a sign. So that's the general outline of the policy. I'm happy to answer any questions and have any discussion from the board. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Chris? We'll start with Mark, and then we'll go to Lori.
Yeah, your policy for reviewing speed limits didn't have in there that a public complaint can cause that to move forward, or a board of supervisor. I assume there's a political way to have this done versus waiting for a lane configuration or traffic control.
Yeah, the idea is if requests come in, then we're going to evaluate, has something changed that we need to do an actual speed limit review of that particular road? And so that's kind of the idea, is to address some of these complaints and have a policy in place to address that and go through those.
So if the public complains to the board and then it comes to you, if it doesn't have any of these in there, you don't review it?
We would review the memo and say, we would confirm that there is no review necessary based on these criteria.
Okay, that makes sense, other than the sheriff's office is in here later, which is the one who writes tickets on the places that seem to have the 85% difference of opinion sometimes, but like Arrowhead, I mean, they sit out there all the time on Arrowhead, but because there's none of these. It's just difficult with Arrowhead because there's nothing but roadway for quite a way in there. But that's not a complaint, that's just a thought. And they used to do the same thing on Edmonds before the freeway was there. They'd sit there and so, to me, sheriff, if they're writing 50 tickets a month in one street, then to me, that would be something you guys would look at versus looking at lane configuration changes, that you have a problem that's going to persist, that people don't seem to want to abandon their speed in those areas.
No, I think that's a fair point, and that's something we could certainly consider adding as part of those processes for the necessitating the need to do an actual review.
I think it makes sense if they're sitting and writing several tickets on the same street and we don't change the sign, it's like without these
Yeah, it's
other
an
reasons.
enforcement
So,
challenge.
yeah.
Okay.
So that was just a point. And then I was going to add in here at your beginning here, each driver, what was it? You had that list of, you needed to add in there about each driver. It's also selected by the kind of car they drive. The amount of horsepower and the design and speed, but.
So the man that you already did.
Yeah, I'm saying that lightly. So I appreciate that you clarify this for people because they need to know that these aren't set arbitrarily, but at least give them a chance to be able to have a review process.
Right.
To me, makes more sense, and usually you'll find in areas, people are complaining, and the sheriff's department already knows about them probably a little bit, so that people aren't behaving as much maybe. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Kimbrough, or Mr. Chair, if it's okay, can I press you a little bit on your first comment related to the 50 tickets on a street? So
What do you mean by press?
inquire further.
There-
In theory, right, if a police officer is writing 50 tickets a week or however many, that means that the public generally using those factors that Chris mentioned are perceiving the road to be safe, that the geometry is wide and perhaps straight, that perhaps there's not a lot of conflict with driveways. As a matter of policy, then staff would ask this body is if we conducted speed studies based on that as a trigger, potentially it would result in a lot of speed limits being increased. Is that, as a matter of policy, something that we want to include? And if so, staff would be open to considering
But I
it.
think it works in reverse, too. Where I live on Silver Oak, that's 25 mile an hour, you ought to see when they're on their way to work in the morning or on their way away from work. So you could actually lower the speed limit there because of complaints that maybe just come from the neighborhood that people are speeding through here, which is, again, a public complaint that maybe doesn't meet these. The speed limit's there, and there's just no enforcement. So there's a whole bunch of things in there that you could raise it or you could lower it. And if the sheriff's department comes in and says, we're writing a bunch of tickets because it's unsafe and there's pedestrians and there's bicyclists and we're just gonna, it's an enforcement problem, then not a speed limit sign problem. And that's, so you kind of got to sit at the table and work it all out with them. But if they're writing a whole bunch of tickets on their head in a section of roadway that has nothing but a straightaway and no driveways, no nothing, and it's 10 miles underneath a normal speed limit for a road like that. So it's open discussion, but allowing the sheriff department to participate if they find that as a problem. Does that make more sense that without one way or the other? I keep hitting the mic.
That's helpful. You're passionate. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I actually think what Mark's discussing brings up the good point, because I will go back to Colorado Street, which is a highly mixed road, right? You do have a lot of residents on one side there that you do have a ton of people parking, you have driveways, and yet it's a collector road. So the speed limit is higher than a residential zone. So that's why I'm getting all the complaints from the residents that we're also on top of a school zone and they're having a hard time understanding why it's safe. And yet when you do the traffic study on it, everybody, sorry to say, but what was that average? I think our 85 percentile or something turned out like 47 miles an hour or something in that area, because it's just what you said. It's so wide from the geometry of the road that people feel safe driving that quickly, even though there are people trying to get out of their driveways and having a really tough time on that. So you have both issues. But one of the things when I was looking at this, and I see that changes to the severity or frequency of crashes is one of the data elements, but when I look at the process for review, the crash data is lower. So I just lower in the process, but it can trigger it in the first place. So am I assuming that once a year again, we look at all the crash data and you'd come up and say, I think we did a change right on Long Street where we had a fatality there. So it can trigger it not just once a year. Any fatality would trigger a review.
I would say when we have fatalities in Carson City, because there's really not that many.
Right, we have so few.
tend to take a look at them and say, what happened here? On the Long Street example, it was an issue of sun and it's going downhill, and it was a really unfortunate situation. However, it became clear pretty quickly it wasn't necessarily a speed limit issue.
Parking.
So we didn't conduct a speed study specifically for that one, but we did go out and we changed some parking configuration and we try to look at how we can improve.
Okay, so I don't know. I don't think it's wrong to look at tickets issued in any area to determine whether the speed is too high or too low. I don't think it's wrong to look at it. It doesn't mean it's going to trigger a change, but there's nothing wrong with triggering a review.
It could be enhanced with a road diet look too. If people are flying down the road, maybe it's a road diet, some ways to slow them down.
Yeah, I was going to mention that one of the elements that factor into speed is I touched on in the presentation is the roadway geometry element, and something like Colorado, like we discussed earlier, with doing some changes to the geometry will affect how people drive on that road. The issue is it's very challenging to change a speed limit and decrease a speed limit and get compliance with that decrease if there's been no change to the roadway geometry in any way, shape, or form. And so studies from the Federal Highway Administration have shown that posting a speed limit without doing any of those changing anything else on the road is not going to cause any change to the vast majority of the drivers. The 85th percentile speed will remain the 85th percentile speed. And similarly, results from the Federal Highway Administration have shown that increasing the speed limit to closer to the 85th percentile speed do not arbitrarily or inflate the 85th percentile speed. Drivers continue to drive at the 85th percentile speed after the speed limit has been increased without seeing that, because that's the speed in which they're comfortable driving the road, and that's the speed in which drivers choose to drive.
And then just, I'm wondering if, Lucia, you could give us an annual report or something just with the results, so that you could say we did 4 studies and this was the result of that. I think that's a nice public transparency thing we could add to our reporting if possible.
I think we could certainly look at incorporating it. Absolutely.
Chaz, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought it was a thorough job. I was intrigued or interested to see on page 3 under the Carson City Code apparently under number 3, it's unlawful to drive any vehicle that's rated at more than 1.5 tons over 15 miles an hour. I don't see much compliance with that around town. I'm just reading it, but I mean, that's neither here nor there, that's what it is, but it does seem a little sort of horse and cart era rule or code. I was also interested to see on page 10 where it says, find that. Not page 10, page 8, under 6, and it's the second bullet that in no case shall the speed limit be set less than 10 miles per hour below the 85th percentile speed. And that sort of talks to what Chris was saying. If the road makes drivers feel comfortable to go that fast, 47 miles an hour on Colorado Street, then just changing the speed limit isn't going to help. You really need to do something else, and that's typically introduce some sort of traffic calming, whether that's, well, the whole range of things in the toolbox, right, that you can look at to do that. So I think that's a really important point. That brings up the point, should there be mention of traffic calming in this? I didn't see anything in here, and it's not really the way you would set the speed limit. It's not like a study, but the study may show that you need to do something other than change the speed limit time, right? So that may be something you want to think about, or if you have a guidelines of when traffic calming of some sort would be appropriate. I would suggest that it's when the 85th percentile is way above the speed you want people to be going, like on Colorado Street, where people are trying to back out of the driveway to the 45 mile an hour traffic. And then, you're probably aware of this, Chris, but NACTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials, is about to come out with their own guidelines for setting traffic speed limits. The practitioner's guide to speed limit setting. It's not out yet. I think it's coming out in a month or two. So in the references, when that does come out, you may want to look at that and see if that has any additional guidance. They often have some really useful stuff to do, in urban settings. And then they also mention that the National Traffic Safety Board is recommending an overhaul of how speed is managed on U.S. streets, including the way we set speed limits. So I think that would be some information that you can incorporate into this going forward when it's available. So I thought a comprehensive job there.
Thank you, Chaz. Greg, do you have any? All right, Luke.
Just one thing.
Sure.
I promise. So I would hope in the traffic calming and that some of the elements of the road diet don't incorporate road speed bumps within the community and the neighborhood, that's all. Because sometimes that's what people expect, to throw speed bumps out on the street. So I just had to say that. Please don't put speed bumps in.
So to follow up on that, either Chris or Lucia, so if there is a request for a traffic study is done, and it is determined that a potential change to the speed limit or some other remediation is warranted, what is the process that you would use to determine whether it is a change to the speed limit or a change to the geography of the road or some other function that is the appropriate remediation measure? And I think that would answer both the comments that Mark and Chaz had about potential traffic calming measures.
I'll take a stab at that one. I think you've hit on the head as to why speed limits are so complicated, is because there are a variety of approaches to take. I think a lot of the items that have been talked about through the policy and through those geometric type elements should be considered as well as a pure reduction or increase of the speed limit, a change of the speed limit. I think that there are a number of traffic calming measures that could be implemented. And I'm a little hesitant to specify something specific like that in a policy without vetting some of those different options, like Mark mentioned, speed bumps and things. And I think it kind of goes into line with how we handle some of our other crosswalk requests and our RFB requests and things like that, where we kind of evaluate them based on how other projects are going and what kind of the timing of some of those things are. That's kind of my stab at that question. If Lucia has any other thoughts.
Well, I think, though, that although it is, I think I agree with you, it's probably not appropriate to put specifics into a policy. I do think that it is appropriate to put in the methodology. And so what I'm asking is this something that is part of the methodology that we should include in the policy? In other words, we're not just going to look at the speed limit. We're also going to look at any other function of the road, whether it's geometry or whatever it may be, to come up with the appropriate remediation.
That's correct. We would look at that. And if we determine that, it's a residential street, but people are driving too fast, we need to look at traffic calming, staff would look at aligning those improvements with an upcoming project to save money and, stretch our dollars and all that great stuff. We would also, want to get some public input as well and maybe talk to the neighbors. I think speed limits it's very personal when it's outside your house. And so you're not going to see with implementation of this policy 500 new speed limit changes. So I can assure you of that.
So I understand that may be how you're going to handle it internally. My comment is related to this policy, and should we include language or some sort of a clarification in this policy about what our methodology is to come up with a remediation, and that we're not just going to look at changing a speed limit sign. And I don't know if there's an appropriate place in here to do that or not, or if it's even appropriate to do that. That's really the discussion point that I'd want us to look at is it appropriate to modify the language here to put in the methodology so that it's very clear that we're not just looking, if we do a traffic study and it's determined that a change is needed, that we're not just looking at changing speed limit signs. We're looking at any of a number of potential remediation functions.
Okay.
That's a great comment. If it's okay with you, we'll take a look and see if or how that can be incorporated.
And then if you go to page 10, number 1 says identify the crash problem. In order to ensure a reasonably stable measure, a minimum of 5 years, crash records would be available for establishing pedestrian safety zones. How does that change when there's a new road and you don't have 5 years crash data?
So this particular item, right, is in the pedestrian safety zones, and that's one of the requirements of the NRS. You cannot generally initiate a pedestrian safety zone without having a record or way of documenting that there are pedestrian safety issues.
So even if we know that there's a mistake or a construction flaw, we have to wait till we have 5 years of crash data before we can make a change?
Well, I think I'm not an expert on this particular NRS, but I think if we find that there's an error in the design that could necessitate the need to implement some sort of adjustment, maybe it's pedestrian safety zone, maybe it's a correction to the design itself to correct that problem.
So
But in general, the pedestrian safety zones are meant to cover areas of known problems.
Okay. Right, I get that, but again, I go back to the new road construction. We build a new road and 3 pedestrians get hit in the first 6 months, so there's obvious a problem. How do you handle that? What do you do?
In that particular instance, a pedestrian safety zone might not be the right source, but it certainly needs to be taken a look at. If we have a number of crashes, that's kind of goes back to the original portion of the policy, where there's a severity and a frequency of crashes zero being, right, no road being zero, and now we have crashes there.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 11,
Way.
if you look at 6.5.4 advisory areas, which is in the pedestrian safety zone section, it doesn't appear that that flows well and that advisory areas under 6.5.4 might be better moved under 7.0 to create a new paragraph under 7.0, where it then talks about the street limit, or the speed limit signs and advisory speed signs, which is similar to the language in the advisory area paragraph. It just seems like it flows better under 7.0 instead of 6.5.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can certainly reevaluate if that needs to be moved around, definitely. Take a look at that.
That was my only comments. All right, any additional or final comments from any of the commissioners on the policy? Chaz? Go ahead, Chaz.
I would like to follow up what you were saying, Brad, about the potential or the circumstance where we have a new or pretty new road and we have a lot of pedestrian conflict. What that really does highlight is the need to have good design in the first place. And I think the city is setting up some guidelines for that with its complete street policy, because that does speak to making streets safer for pedestrian or users, pedestrian bicyclists, as well as vehicles. So I think it just highlights the importance of the city review during, the approval of new designs that come forward. So I think it's an important point, but the best way to tackle it is before it happens, by getting the design right in the first place.
Thank you, Chaz. Any final comments? All right, then I'll bring this back for a potential motion. Oh, no motion. All right, for information only. Well, thank you. Yeah, we'll make a motion. All right, then we will move on to item number 7 on the agenda, internal communications and administrative matters, non-action items. We will start with item 7A, transportation manager's report. Lucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So despite current events, staff have been cruising along. We're fully staffed now, and it's tough to keep up with our great staff. So thanks to all the staff for doing a really, really great job the last few months. A few months ago, staff brought a change in the functional classification of South Lampa between Edmonds and Fairview. I wanted to report that FHWA has approved that change. That's being updated in the functional class maps that are published, and that road will now be eligible for federal funds such as Surface Transportation Block Grant funding. There's that. The Jumper on Carson contract operator RFP is out. I mentioned that earlier. It is open and will close on June 2nd. Wanted to give you a little bit of an update on the South Carson project. We mentioned it last time, but reduction in traffic volumes has helped us kind of catch up with the schedule. There was a little bit of a delay at the very start of the project for when the feds approved our Tiger Grant agreement. We've made up that time, and SNC so far has been doing a really great job. However, there have been some hiccups during COVID-19, specifically related to procurement and maintaining social distancing for our workers. I heard that we had not gotten any specific citations for us, but SNC had gotten something up in Reno, so we're just being extra careful with our construction crews. They're all wearing masks, maintaining physical distancing, and doing the best they can. Today, we are completing the work on the storm drain that connects to Road Street. This is an area that's caused considerable flooding, so it's really great. We did that up front. We have carved in a majority of the new multi-use path between Clearview and Sonoma. And this was the portion that reused existing road, and we've started placing the curb and gutter around that. We've removed all the old median curbing and completed a majority of the concrete work along the frontage road. I know we got a comment about that last month. So there will no longer be a need to use that one way, which was admittedly confusing to some drivers. So that should be all removed. And then a lot of the work that's happened so far are things that you maybe wouldn't see when you're driving through the cone zone. We've replaced to date over 1,300 feet of water line. We've replaced 150 feet of old sewer line. We are installing almost 2,500 feet of the storm drain system, placing 2,000 feet of fiber optic conduit, and placing 2,000 feet of irrigation line. Looking ahead, we're going to start the large storm drain system. If you've driven through, you've seen big pipes out there sitting in the road, and that's going to go north from Stewart Street to relieve some of the flooding issues in front of the mall there. And that will happen after Memorial Weekend, and then we'll come back late June, early July, and begin construction in the roundabout. So happy to answer any additional questions on that.
Just one word of caution on the construction crews. I don't know that it's wise to trade off worker safety and potential workers' comp claims in order to appropriately social distance on a construction site where they're using heavy equipment. So I don't know why OSHA is really going out of their way to target certain industries that are not, in my opinion, reasonable. But again, I would rather pay a fine than have a worker hurt because we weren't able to have two construction workers stand side by side to lift something heavy.
Appreciate the comment. I also
Give
want
me
to,
how much sewer line again? 150 feet or 1,500 feet?
150 feet of old sewer line to date.
150 feet. And it was 1,300 though of water line?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
thank you.
On the CARES Act, moving on to the next item, on the CARES Act grant, this is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act from the federal government. Carson City was apportioned $3.7 million. And the reason this didn't come to you for approval to submit an application is because this was an apportionment. So this was similar to the 5307 funding that the transit fund receives for Jump Around Carson, where it just comes through to us. Technically, staff submit what's called an application in the Federal Transit Administration online system. So it is an application. However, that's the reason we didn't bring it to you. It was an apportionment. We plan to use the apportionment. It's eligible for expenses incurred starting January 20th at 100% of federal share. So we plan to, instead of using some of the existing federal grants that we have for transit, we plan to switch entirely to the CARES grant at 100%. As you are aware, the transit fund has been performing pretty poorly for the last several years. We do as much as we can with our match that we have, and that's all we have. We spend what we have. So this will allow that fund to get into a little bit more secure financial state into the next couple fiscal years. There are some capital purchases planned for that grant, and those will of course come to this group for approvals pursuant to normal policies. And you can anticipate seeing those in the next couple of months. Happy to answer any additional questions on that CARES Act. The Board of Supervisors did request that staff bring it forward. It will be heard at the May 21st board meeting to officially accept the grant. However, I will note that that grant has been approved and accepted. As you know, that it just comes through as an apportionment. So I will provide more information at that meeting publicly. And then finally, there was a comment at the last month's meeting on the Transportation Alternatives Program grant application for the multi-use path connection of Roop Street by Governor's Field. Commissioner McQuarrie made a comment about a rapid rectangular flashing beacon. I did not have the answer at that time, but I did want to confirm that we are including that in our grant application submittal. The deadline for the submittal was extended, but we anticipate submitting that maybe next week. So that will be included. Happy to answer any additional questions that you all have.
You're on a roll, Chaz, getting everything you wish for tonight. Are there any additional questions on the Transportation Manager's report? Seeing none, then we'll move on to the Street Operations Activity Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On item 7B, what was provided is prepared for March of 2020. Some items that will call to your attention are the tree care chemical treatment. That's this time of year. We really look out for our trees. You'll see some weed abatement work, curb and gutter. And I did want to note at the bottom of page 2, which is packet page 146, I was locked in my house, so I actually had to ask staff if this was correct, but we did have 5 snow events in March where we applied a fair amount of salt, sand, and brine. So that's included as well. Happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? I would just note that we had 2 months this winter where there was 0 precipitation, 0. March was not one of those months. The majority of the precipitation that we received for the winter actually came, I believe, in December and March, 2 months. All right, we will move on to board comments. We'll start with you, Chaz. Any board comments tonight?
I would just like to know whether Dirk's been letting a dog or a cat in and out of his office. No, I don't have anything.
Dirk, he can see Dirk. We can't see Dirk, so I'm glad you can see it. Greg, you have any comments?
I do not.
Mark?
I have a question, and I don't know if you can answer it or somebody answer it. When you drive on Airport Road between the highway and right there by the, it's Airport Road on the way to your main office, there's all these pipes about every 200 feet with a generator and things running down them, and the plastic pipes, so they have all these concrete Jersey barriers, like somebody's gonna run over them or something. There's like 6 in a row. What is that all about? Is that like a alien invasion of some sort, or?
So that's part of the airport sewer replacement project. And what they're doing is they've put in some dewatering wells, they call them. And so they're lowering the groundwater so that they can dig down and install the sewer pipes without the sewer pipes being underwater. The water table in that area is very high. So they've got a number of wells in that area to temporarily lower the water table.
That's pretty intensive to get that taken care of, all that.
It's very expensive too.
Yeah, I bet you it's expensive, so, wow. Okay, thank you. Now I understand, and
Lori? All right, I don't have any comments either, so we will move on to agenda item number 9. The next meeting is tentatively scheduled after the CAMPO meeting on June 10th, 2020, right here in the Sierra Room and online, as is this meeting. Finally, our final public comment, agenda item number 10. Do we have anybody on the line for public comment?
There is no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Desi. So we're now on agenda item 11 for adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you all.